Blade is a wind element destruction DPS with a heavy emphasis on AoE damage. He is also an incredibly tanky unit due to his high HP scaling through his kit and his ability to self-heal. You should, however, still have a healer beside him. Blade is also very easy to use. His kit has no complex mechanics, just a few things that you need to worry about lining up for buffs. He is also incredibly light on the skill points, only needing to use one every 3 turns. And one thing many people are going to appreciate is due to his high HP scaling and very low attack scaling, there are certain supports that just won't work very well with him, thus freeing them up for your second team. Of course, there's always going to be some cons as well. With such an extreme emphasis on AoE damage, in single target situations, he may struggle by himself. He may not quite reach the level of the top tiers in DPS, but I think he is still going to be comparable. With his talent wanting him to take damage from enemies, it can sometimes be frustrating to be fighting slow or incapacitated enemies, and the fact that he has no built-in taunt only emphasizes this problem. He can also be a little bit expensive to build, needing every single trace to do maximum DPS in an optimal situation. That does make him a little bit more expensive than some of the DPS that can actually just ignore their basic attack, because oftentimes you're planning to either never use it or only use it in very specific situations. Either way, it often ends up being a very low portion of your average DPS's overall damage done in the course of a single battle. But for Blade, that's not the case, because he does have an enhanced version of his basic attack, which is dictated by the basic attack level. So let's start off with this kit, and what do you start most combats with? Their technique, of course. Blades is a pretty run-of-the-mill DPS technique. You press your button, you do some damage, and you start the battle doing your element and possibly breaking some enemies. The one advantage Blade's technique does have is it does reduce his HP right off the start. That's going to allow him to jumpstart his talent by 1 extra charge. Speaking of his talent, it may look relatively wordy, but it is rather simple. When Blade takes damage, whether it be by his own hand or the enemies, he gains a charge of his talent in the bottom left. At 5 stacks, he's going to unleash an AoE follow-up attack that does pretty impressive damage as well as heals his own HP. And the great thing about this, it has no limits. It can be stacked up and spent as fast as you can take damage. Here's where the con I mentioned earlier comes in. Blade has no inherent way to increase his own taunt value. All he has is the natural taunt value the destruction path has. So you are going to be a little bit reliant on enemy RNG and who they target to do maximum DPS. But I'll cover things a little bit later, maybe a few things you can do to try to make your Blade more likely to be attacked. But hey, the good news is he's not nearly as reliant on it as a unit like Clara is. It's merely just a bonus, but it's a very nice bonus. Onto his skill. This is Blade's bread and butter. This is where most of his damage is going to be coming from. The skill itself will initially consume your own HP to put Blade into the Hellscape state. While in the Hellscape state, Blade is going to do increased damage, but more importantly, his basic attack is going to turn into the Forest of Swords. Both the damage and the Forest of Swords enhancement are going to last 3 turns. And while the skill itself does cost skill points, using Forest of Swords does not. This makes Blade a relatively neutral skill point unit, only using 1 skill point every 3 turns. And finally, the turn you actually use the skill, you are able to use Forest of Swords immediately, as your skill itself does not end your current turn. So let's talk Forest of Swords, the enhanced basic attack. As you can see, it does more damage to the primary target than it does to the adjacent targets, and that also means it has a 3 enemy limit of what it can hit. And of course, just like most things in Blade's kit, every time you use Forest of Swords, it is going to consume some of your HP, thus giving you a stack of your talent. That also means that the turn you actually use your skill on, you're immediately getting 2 charges of your talent, which is fantastic. You can also see that Forest of Swords does not regenerate skill points, which is how he ends up being almost neutral. He will also never deal a fatal blow to himself, leaving himself at 1 HP. However, he does want to consume as much HP as possible. Why? Well, for his ultimate. Blade's ultimate, as you might have guessed, is another source of AoE damage. Unlike Blade's other abilities, it doesn't strictly consume your HP. Whatever your HP percentage may be before you actually use Blade's ult will determine whether it heals you or lowers your HP. You might also wonder, because it says it sets his current HP to 50%, does that count as him taking damage? And I can answer that for you right now. Yes, it does still count as taking damage and will give him a charge of his talent. Let's talk about why Blade wants to lose HP. One of the more interesting aspects of Blade's ultimate is the fact that it actually stores the damage that Blade takes and adds it as bonus damage to his attacks. It may sound rather complicated in the wording, but it is just simple. Blade takes damage and consumes his own HP and does more damage every time he uses his ultimate. And when he uses his ultimate, this cycle resets itself. Now that you understand how his kit works and you know the basics of Blade, we can go over the traces real quick. And they were very kind with Blade's traces. Nothing really wasted here. No attack nodes with his low attack scaling, and lots of HP and crit rate nodes to pick up. Even a couple of effect res. And while effect res may not always be necessary due to having a cleanser in your party, it never hurts to have a little under your belt. Blade's first bonus trace, while not super exciting, is relatively important given how often he will be low HP and he will often need healing either through himself or his teammates. Blade's second bonus trace, while nothing again to write home about, more self-healing is always welcomed in a kit like this. And finally, Blade's third bonus trace will just increase the damage from his follow-up attack and his talent by 20%. A nice little bonus. Let's talk relics and stats that you want to aim for, because both are relatively intertwined in Blade's case. For starters, Blade is releasing alongside a new 4-piece relic set, which is going to give him more max HP as well as more crit rate whenever he takes damage. This crit rate is going to be incredibly important if you also plan on using a new 2-piece planar ornament set that's going to give him more basic attack and skill damage if you get up to 70% crit rate, which 70% may initially sound like a lot, but Blade gets 12% from his traces, 5% from a base, 16% from the new 4-piece relic set, and 32.4% from a chest at level 15. All of that adds up to 65.4% crit rate. You don't even need the signature light cone with that much crit rate. If you're also feeling a little bit spicy, you can also go for his E2, which will give him 15% crit rate whenever he's in his hellscape state, which is literally all the time. As you can see, reaching that stat threshold for crit rate is not nearly as intimidating as it might have initially seemed. So while you can use something else while you potentially farm for the new set for Blade, eventually you do want to end up on the Longevous Disciple 4-piece set. It synergizes with his kit, and it also synergizes with the Rutilant Arena 2-piece planar set that he'll also likely be using. As for what stats you should get on each relic, body should have crit rate unless you plan on getting the E2 plus the signature weapon, then you may want to consider crit damage instead. As for feat, you got the usual here. You want speed or HP percent. You really want to let your substats guide you here, and whichever one you happen to get better of, you're probably going to want to go with that one, but speed would likely be preferable. Planar Sphere, to nobody's surprise, you want wind damage. Planar Rope, you want HP percent. Now substats. This is where things get a little bit complicated, because it's going to depend on entirely what you have. But for you E0 coneless people, crit damage is going to be your most important stat. Get crit rate up to a certain point, but you are going to have a lot of it. Get HP percent after that. Get what speed you can get, and any attack you can get is merely a bonus. Seriously, do not aim for it. Let's talk light cones. This is very simple because up until now, every destruction character has been an attack scaler. So there are going to be a few light cones that aren't exactly appealing options for Blade. Ignoring Blade's signature light cone for now, which obviously is going to be his best in slot, let's look at the HP scaling of destruction light cones. As you can see, we have some appealing options. The 5 stars actually have relatively respectable HP values compared to the best 4 stars. However, there is a problem. Their effects are catered towards attack scaling units. And while there are still aspects of these light cones that they can take advantage of, there is a 4-star alternative that has no wasted bonuses that buff attack. That's the cone A Secret Vow. Not only does a Secret Vow rival the Simulated Universe cone's HP, but it also surpasses its effect in damage boosting capabilities. Even at Super Imposition 1, you're getting just a free 20% bonus for nothing. And then if the enemy's HP percentage is higher than Blade's, which very likely is going to be a lot of the time, you get even more of a damage bonus against those enemies. Since it's a 4-star, the possibility of getting max refinement eventually will always be there. Of course, it's also possible the gacha system will not smile favorably upon you, and you'll never get a copy, which in that case, falling back on the Simulated Universe cone is not a bad idea due to its high stat value. And sometimes you're also going to weakness break the enemy and sometimes trigger the second bonus effect, which is still relatively potent. Of course, if you're looking for his absolute best in slot, look no further than his signature light cone with the highest HP of all destruction light cones, tied for the highest attack, and a bunch of free stats from the passive effects. This is the light cone you ultimately want to get. Lastly, I'm going to cover teammates, and I'm going to go over this in a little bit of a different way. Blade has a few anti-synergies you want to look out for. Avoid pairing Blade with units who draw aggro away from Blade, units who have shields for him, other units who also primarily do AoE DPS, buffers whose strongest value lies in increasing attack, and units who slow enemies down or keep them CC'd, thus making them unable to hit Blade. Some of these units might actually be able to work in certain Blade teams with the right team composition, but as a general rule, I think you should especially avoid the top 2 rows. As for units that synergize well with Blade, we have Defense Shredders. Defense Shred is universal and doesn't care what a character scales off of to increase DPS. Silver Wolf, on top of being able to add a potential wind weakness to an enemy, will also heavily debuff a single target, improving Blade's single target damage ability. In general, she's going to be one of his best teammates. Pella is going to do a similar job, job. However, she will occasionally freeze an enemy given that she is an ice element if she ever causes a weakness break, and that isn't as desirable for Blade. Regardless, both are fantastic. Universal buffers, aka pretty much just Bronya. While her kit does feature an attack percent buff, it isn't exactly the focus of her kit. The crit damage here is really what we want, as well as the ability to advance Blade's turns forward, as well as giving just raw damage percent. Just an all-around great buffer, to nobody's surprise. Single target DPS. With Blade's incredibly low skill point consumption, you do have the option to put a hunt character, or just anyone who's capable of single target, except maybe not Hook because she's a destruction character, and they'll share a taunt value. And of course, one of his most important allies, the healer. Every healer is going to work, it's just that he has synergy with Luocha and Bailu. Luocha has the ability to heal Blade every time he goes under 50% health, which is constantly, which is also going to help keep his own field up, which will help keep the party healed. Bailu is actually capable of increasing Blade's DPS by increasing his max HP with her bonus trace, on top of being able to auto-revive him should he ever suffer an untimely death when he has low HP. Bad news is due to the unpredictability of Bailu's skill, she may very well cause Blade to die sometimes, which will be a self-fulfilling prophecy making her passive necessary. Where Luocha can, well, he heals like a truck. He heals so much single target, and he can also cleanse, but so can Natasha. Really, you can't go wrong with any of these three options, but my personal preference is Luocha. I encourage you to get creative with Blade's team, given that he has very low skill point requirements. That opens him up to a lot of potential teams. And while he may not have an insane amount of dedicated supports right now that really work well with him, he does still have options. So thank you to my members and my patrons for supporting me as always. Thank you to you for watching. Good luck pulling for Blade, and I'll see you in the next one.
Attaboy!